Well, hi everybody. I'm Mark Skilton. I'm a global director with Capgemini. I've been with Cap about just over a year, but my career to date has really spanned almost 30 years. I recognise some of you from my MBA that I did here quite a few years ago. My role in Capgemini, I'm actually a global strategy director in outsourcing at the moment. We are currently restructuring, which seems to be a perennial disease of most companies these days. But my role is actually developing strategic thinking and innovation ideas within the company. So foolishly, I had a meal a few weeks ago and I said to the person I was sitting next to, I've been doing some stuff which I think might be quite interesting for the school, and I'd like a chance to lecture. And lo and behold, I got this call about a week ago and suddenly I'm here. So I'm hoping that I'll do a good job. What I want to do is I want to take you to a place where I am. I'm going to show you a window into my soul, my world of the strategy within IT. It's not just outsourcing, but it's actually about the changes in our industry, in IT, but also how that affects the business industries, like supply chain or pharmaceutical, telco, government, all those things that are using IT. I'm going to show you some of the challenges that I've got in terms of trying to develop a differentiation and competitive advantage scenario for my company. So what I want to do is I want to try and take you in that journey to show you some of the changes that are going on, I believe, in the marketplace. And I want to show you really the bit in the middle of the meat and the sandwich is really the changes in competitive advantage, how the barriers are changing due to cloud computing, due to Web 3.0, due to different types of collaboration strategies. I want to show you how that is changing the way business strategy may be evolving. So really there are 5 things or 4 things I want to do. I want to basically introduce some ideas to you, which I'm hoping won't be new, but there may be combinations of things that I'm going to show you that might be slightly different in the way you're looking at these things today. I actually took my MBA in 1992, which is sort of seems like forever, but it's pre-internet era. And that's a big thing. Basically all of the models that I learned effectively now defunct, in my view, in terms of solving the problems that I've got now. Not saying that what you're doing today will be defunct in 20 years. I think that's just the evolution of strategy anyway. But it's just, what I want to do is I want to test your ideas, because hopefully what you're learning is new strategies, new models, and I would like to hear what you have at the end, but also interrupt me at any time, please. If you, disagree, obviously, with what I'm saying, but equally, any insights, please share them. One of the things, as I said, is trying to do is develop differentiation. And this is very, very hard, I think, particularly some of the scenarios I'm going to show you is where traditional ownership of the value chain, horizontal and vertical scaling, where big companies particularly have owned part of that landscape through investment CapEx programs, they're suddenly finding that the emperor's clothes are being taken off them by small upstart companies who can basically deploy similar capabilities, copying those bigger providers' offerings, because they can access on-demand services behind their value chain. So I'll show you some scenarios there. Also in my role, I do a lot of traveling. I've got connections in America, in India, and elsewhere in Europe. And the things I'm going to show you is sort of real-time things that are happening to me in the last 3 months. The sort of things that I'm talking to in West Coast and East Coast of America. I'm going to share some ideas with you. I'm going to show you what's going on in India a bit. I'm also going to show you what's going on in some of the European markets, so the things I'm doing there as well. So this is real-time stuff. So here we go. So one of the things I want to really stress upon, first of all, is really the scale of magnitude. I was lucky a few years ago to go on a cloud tour, as they called it then. And I went to Seattle and I actually visited the Amazon headquarters in Seattle, Washington. One of the things that sort of put the hair on the back of my head was they started talking about planet-scale systems. I'll just say it again, planet-scale systems. Never heard of that phrase before, but the way they see the world is the planet. So when they implement systems, they implement into the planet, and they basically look at planetary regions as their marketplace. Really impressive stuff. But you can just look at these statistics here. You can get these off the internet. Everything I've got here has got URLs. Wouldn't be an IT presentation if it wasn't. If you look at basically on the left-hand side, your right-hand side is, in the last 2 years, the internet allegedly has grown double. If you do the maths on that, that's effectively 1.5 million users, I've got it written down here, per day. Phenomenal growth. We're in the era of scale, massive scale at the moment. You look at Facebook, the poster child at the moment, great film, I haven't seen it yet, hopefully go next weekend. The scale of speed that company grew, it started in 1999, I think, if I remember rightly. It's now, when I visited a couple of years ago, I actually went to Palo Alto and actually again visited Facebook headquarters. Apart from the comfy chairs and all these sofas and the sort of really chilled out, hey man, it's a great place to live sort of company ethos. Then there were 350 million accounts. 2 years later, they're now 500 million. But the key thing that I'm going to show you is they talk about the social graph, the interaction of different consumers and users in their world. And the statistics to speak for themselves, they are phenomenal in terms of the ability to understand and learn about their customer base. Twitter, I think everybody here has probably got a Twitter account. Incidentally, if you want to Twitter during the lecture, I welcome that. That'd be good, and I'll answer any questions from Twitter. Saying that Twitter, apparently they're saying that only 17% of those accounts are actually active Twitters, but I don't think that's a particularly important statistic. The point is that the surface of interaction is changing. So whereas the Facebook, as I would say, is a private collaboration network, we talk about Twitter as a kind of a public communication forum where you announce things, you tell people things, what's going on. So remember, the title of this lecture is about collaboration and how is that transforming business. And I would say these are very public examples of where commercial and consumer systems are starting to impact on the thinking in the business areas. And of course, Amazon, my favorite. We've got a Center of Excellence, Capgemini, in India, which I've done some work with, and some of the scenarios you'll see will be based on some of the thinking that we've done there. But the growth there just speaks for itself. 120% is predicted in the next 5 years. What that means is that companies are starting to realise that they don't have to spend CapEx on investment structures. They can move to OpEx and start to buy on-demand services much more quickly and easily. It doesn't have to be Amazon, it could be Rackspace, it could be Gigaspaces, or it could be Google or whatever, Microsoft, IBM, Capgemini. Google again is really impressive in terms of the way it's grown. I think it's got about 130 million email accounts at the moment, I believe, Gmail. It's just phenomenal, the size and growth. And I call it the hockey stick moment of 2004, 2005, where suddenly we see this kick, which is basically due to the broadband connections starting to get bigger as the market grows. So the first thing I want to get across to you is the scalability law is changing rapidly in terms of resources from an IT point of view. The second thing I want to do is I need to download some thinking ideas in the next few slides to you so you can kind of understand where I'm coming from. What we have here is, from a user point of view, what's the problem? What's the opportunity? I mean, it's just easy. I just log on, like we were doing just a moment ago. We just go and do some search. We can go and do some transactions. I can just dart around and I can just get whatever I want. So from a user experience point of view, it's very easy to get into this kind of service-based interaction of services. Over here on your right, what you're starting to build here is a kind of metadata of you. I use that in terms of describing yourself and interacting with different types of services when you need it. So that's an important point there, is the metadata of you is starting to be encoded into the systems that you use. So what's the changes to that mean? What does it actually mean in terms of you becoming digital? Well, I would argue that what's happening is you're starting to create personas. What's a persona? Is basically, you could be a persona where you have the public me, where you have, say, Twitter or a Facebook account and you're publishing information about yourself, or it could be on a company email system. Or you can have your work persona where you're actually doing transactions. You've got liabilities that you've got to sort of deal with. You've got to do work online or collaboration with people. Or you could have personal personas where you have private information and data and things like that. You can do that through many channels, and you have this phrase called online at the core. Online at the core is a phrase you'll start to hear more often, where a lot of the things that a company is doing, or you as an individual, are basically doing things naturally through the internet. And one of the questions I want to ask everybody here was, I don't know about you, but I find that there's my physical self, but part of me is actually virtually located elsewhere in some of the interactions. So I've got a very good friend in San Francisco, and also some friends in New York. And part of me is digitally over there at the same time. It's difficult to explain this. And I imagine, I was going to ask people here, I was going to ask who feels physically here but actually is mentally elsewhere. That was probably my first question. I actually wanted to bring it back to say, who is physically here but actually feels part of their life is conducted online? Just put your hand up. What percentage would you say is, you spend 20% of your time is online, or more than that?
Yeah, I would say 40.
Really? Is that, and those people, do you feel that they're sort of your social peer group, or is it business as well?
Combination. I think it's very easy to develop common interest groups internationally.
Yeah.
And they can be in business or personal or hobbies, you know, business interests, management theories.
Yep.
Yeah, but they are definitely global. And I certainly find that you work in different time zones, particularly on Twitter. You know, some of you people are there at you know, Pacific time, and some are there in Eastern time, and some are in India. So you have to work.
Yeah. But you know, I would argue that probably most people in this audience have some element of digital self held in some kind of cyberspace, or some kind of profile of people that you know through a digital connection. Not saying this is just for entertainment or it's just a side effect for some of the work you're doing. I'm saying it's actually a physical change from 10 years ago. It's fundamentally that different. Now, this may be a statement to the obvious, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it is true that that sort of world is changing. And I would say there's probably 3 areas that you need to keep an eye on as a strategy planning exercise. The first one is you need to look at the tools. So what we find here, and the notation I'm using here is a thing called churn. It's a new methodology that I'm developing, which is something else that we can talk about offline elsewhere. But on the side here is you're starting to use tools. You have monitoring tools, monitoring what information is going on. I don't mean monitoring in terms of system monitoring. I mean in terms of finding out what's the current prices on the stock market, or what's the current prices on Amazon for books, or what sort of information is, or what's my colleagues doing. Search engines, wikis. Avatars, that's where you basically have a digital self online interacting with other digital selves. And then what you can do is you can start to collaborate, and you can cross-sell and upsell online. You can start to use these different techniques to start to do types of business transactions. You can use loyalty and rewards and points, and I'll come back to that later on in the lecture. That is something you're starting to see. I have a colleague based in Burbank, California, who's very closely associated with online IT in Los Angeles and elsewhere. And the culture over there is very much getting into sort of point systems and incentives, and online gaming and things like that is very strong in that country. And what he's saying, there's a lot of events now going on where people are starting to, have you heard of Foursquare.com? Where you become the mayor of a town if you visit it and say, I've been here, and you've been there 3 times, you become the mayor of it. It's weird, but it's true. And there's a thing called Farmville. Farmville, who's heard of Farmville? Who plays Farmville? Who wants to admit they play Farmville? Okay, there are more accounts, live accounts on Farmville. It's owned by Facebook. It's a Facebook gaming thing. Than there are Twitter accounts, and there are 150 million Twitter accounts. More Facebook accounts, more Farmville accounts than Twitter. It's that big. We'll get back to that later. Second thing we need to look at is resources. The concept I want to bring to you is this idea of physical resources and virtual resources. And at the end, I'm going to lay that question back to you. And what we're finding now is the business strategy is kind of operating in 2 modes. One is physical resources, and also in virtual resources. Weird, but it's true. And the third thing I want to point to is composites. And this is what I call emergent behavior. And that's something that you start off, and Farmville is actually a very good example of emergent capabilities, where Facebook was started off as a kind of online social thing, but suddenly they introduced gaming. Before you know where you are, you've suddenly got a massive gaming hit on your hands. The composites is where you start to get location-based data. Or tags, or triples. Triples is just triple tags is just more information about the location, so you get more semantic richness about that location data. What you're getting there is kind of compositional information that combines different sources of information to create new information and more value-added information than before. So that's another thing we need to think about, and I would say that particular area in terms of business strategy is where we're seeing a lot of emerging new companies starting to exploit new propositions to customers. And then finally, I just want to point to you in terms of the cycle here. types of knowledge, personal knowledge, augmented knowledge, group knowledge, different types of knowledge is starting to be created. And what we're seeing here is this kind of this social CRM, this automated marketing, preference profiling, understanding your market, understanding the person's preferences, and that cycle of information is starting to turn quite rapidly now in many, many markets. So the third thing I want to program into your heads, so I'm still taking on a sort of download mode at the moment, is that what's this actually meaning? And I just showed you the slide about you becoming different personas. I just showed you a slide that had different types of resources and thinking that you can introduce around those personas. But in the wider scale of things, what we're seeing here is this idea that you start to create a set of technologies that integrate into an industry marketplace and starts to change the fabric and interaction of that industry. So I'll use some case studies in a minute to illustrate that to you. And I always like these virtual reality things where you hold up and you can sort of get the location-based picture and you're starting to see bits of those coming out. And I think that will grow. The idea of going into three-dimensional space and being able to visually interact with the information is not only going to be on your personal services level, but I think business supply chains will start to work that way. Not there yet, but it will do. And what's happening is you're starting to get what I call augmented intelligence. Augmented intelligence is where you have a supply chain of your business, your customers, suppliers, your intermediates, and you're starting to get more telemetry, more information about that supply chain digitally brought together so you can make more business decisions. So that's the other piece of information I wanted to download into your heads and say there's a set of technologies that you need to be aware of that are growing and changing the way industry is interacting. 3 case studies. Animoto is a famous example. It's the poster child of how cloud computing sort of got off the ground. And their famous quote is really, they went from 25,000 users to 700,000 users in 1 week. That's a big jump. That is called elasticity going on hot rod. That is poof, like that. And what we're talking about here is the first thing I want to stress is the idea of a business in the cloud. What is the cloud? It's just a set of offline digital services you can buy on a pay-as-you-go basis. And so the first thing we're starting to see in business strategy being transformed by collaboration technologies and resources online is you can start to get what we call virtual organizations springing up inside the cloud. Second one is NASDAQ OMG. NASDAQ is basically obviously a place where you get stock market information. What they wanted to do is they wanted to introduce all of the historical data and stock and fund data. They wanted to actually start selling that back to customers who wanted to analyze that historical data. And so what they did was they used what we call a rich internet application. It's basically Adobe Air. It's just a device or a software program you download onto your device. And you can basically query this database in the cloud. The point I want to show you here is this ability to basically go and get information over here. So what they had over there was they used Amazon to store all of the historical data about stock market information. Low cost, it was very cost effective to do so. If they were to do it in-house, it would cost them a lot of money. So they basically used the cost advantages and the scalability of Amazon to store. And then they introduced this kind of query tool that allowed customers through subscription to go and analyze the data. So the second point I want to show you here is the ability to query information as a service. This is another type of strategy. And the final one is New York Times. Amazing one this is. This is where they have 11 million published articles from 1851 to 1989. And they wanted to basically archive all of those historical published newspapers and to offer that back as a service, a subscription service, to go and analyze historical data from newspapers. So what they did with there, and I wanted to show you, the third thing I want to show you is this idea you can start to do workloads. I use that word again, workloads in the cloud. Workload, what is a workload? Workload is something like, in this example, taking some archive files and using an external provider to process them into a storage environment, Amazon in this case. So the concept I want to show you there is where it's cost effective, you can start to move some of your business workloads into an online cloud environment. Now this is all fairly IT orientated, forgive me for doing that, but it's it's real. It's in terms of business thinking. This is the business proposition here. This is a business in the cloud. It is the ability to go and do low-cost storage and processing in the cloud, and then offering it back as a kind of a search function to customers in the physical world. This is just an example, but it's one that you see in many, many cases in organizations where they have historical data and they want to basically store this effectively. So what's this mean then in terms of business strategy? What I would say is this, what's happening is that we're getting a concept called co-mingling. Whereas before we were kind of taught that this is the value chain, we've got the suppliers over here, the customers over here, and it's a kind of a longitudinal, serial sort of arrangement where you go from left to right. And what I'm finding in the cloud particularly, and I use the cloud as a euphemism for all this sort of thing, is you're starting to see suppliers and intermediates and customers interacting. They don't have to go, they have choices. They can go different directions. They can go directly to a provider, or they can go through an intermediate who may aggregate. And the idea of this supply chain is just starting to change. I did some work with Volvo a few years ago. And one of the things that really stopped me dead in my tracks when I was talking to Volvo, they said, well, I understand you're a provider of sort of IT services, but what we'd like to do is to use your platform to integrate with our suppliers. We will use you as a kind of an intermediate staging post to go and interact with our suppliers. And I said, well, isn't that our job? We would do the integration for you, and we would sort the suppliers and customers. No. We just want you to stand in the middle, and we would just use you as a platform. Completely different thinking. It's what I call bi-directional thinking in this kind of world, where you can start to change the rules of the game. And I'll show you some case studies later about that further. So one of the things we need to think about is the interaction of the social network and the business network are coming together in the cloud. Social network in terms of your persona, of your personal relationships and your colleagues, as well as your business relationships and your colleagues there. They're all starting to collaborate and starting to get this kind of profile of data flowing in this mix. So what's this mean in terms of real world? And I would say in the real world, with here's a pharmaceutical company example that our CTO, global CTO, has been doing some work on. Is that really this is real? This is not just a Facebook phenomenon. This is actually a corporate phenomenon of social groups and business groups coming together. And pharmaceutical business areas is a good one because the complexity of that industry, the way it's changing in terms of licensing laws, patents, renewing of patents, the new drug trials and things like this, which we'll talk about in a minute, is really changing the way they need to interact. And remember, I showed you that idea of not just a serial supply chain, you can actually interact with different suppliers and consumers. That can start to change. And this kind of thinking of using collaboration technology to improve your transformation and business performance is a way of thinking about your industrial landscape here. I like this one. I was wondering whether it was politically correct to use Jesus in the middle, but it was just something I liked, so I just took it off the internet. It was just an example of really a social network. And I think the first thing you need to think about is in developing a strategy is thinking about what is your stakeholder network? What is the interaction of those sort of interactions between different stakeholders? What's their different behaviors? What is their profiles and preferences? And this, as I say, remember I mentioned about Facebook, about the social graph. I think if I remember right from the statistics and the researching of this, I think they said that on average, one individual had friends of friends, about 130 friends of friends on average. It seemed more than I've got 130 friends, but maybe that's just me. But it's this idea that you start to map out your stakeholder interactions is the first kind of thinking around this area. This is an example here of really where this is going. There was a very good article a few months back from the New York Times, which I'd urge you to read, which is where, if you heard of Nicholas Carr. Nicholas Carr wrote The Big Switch. You may have heard of that book. His latest book is called What is the Internet Doing to Your Brains? It's another good book if you want a good read. Basically what he's advocating in these books, and this is just another article here, is the sum total of all the things I'm talking about is that we're starting to see this web-based digital ecosystem evolving. We're starting to see the thing called the Internet of Everything growing in front of us. And what we're seeing is this idea that we're starting to collect different sorts of information at each of those stakeholder points that I just showed you. So what you're starting to see here is you're starting to see sensors, smartphones, video surveillance, information about your location, your travel, your likes, your dislikes, your heart rate. So they could be detecting whether you're healthy, are you an insurance liability or a policy opportunity. Your consumption habits and stuff like that. All these things as your digital footprint is starting to leave a trail behind you, and you can start to use this to start to develop an insight about your behaviours and choices and likes and dislikes. This is an example of privacy. This is actually Facebook, the favourite poster child, but also one that a lot of people tend to have an issue with in terms of privacy. This is a very hot topic at the moment. A couple of weeks ago they introduced this idea of Facebook groups. I asked my second eldest daughter, what is Facebook? And she knows all about these things, of course, and I tend not to look at Facebook because some of the things they do on there, I think, I don't really need to know that. Too much information. But basically they were saying that Facebook groups allows you to control the security level. So you have friends and you have friends of friends, and you can control that sort of access. One of the things of the impact of all of this, digitisation, the internet of everything, is this idea that privacy is starting to be eroded. And what do we need to do about that? I'll head to that a bit later. But what we're seeing here on this particular diagram here is you have all these different facets of your privacy. Your photos, your likes or dislikes, your name, your picture, your demographics, extended profile data, where you live and things like that, your friends and your friends of friends, and then your networks. And they're introducing this Facebook groups. But what it means, if you look at the graph down here, is that the big blue circle here is that basically everybody can see a lot of this information. A lot of it is open to the public. Another thing, a few sort of statistics you need to be aware of is the Digital Economy Act, that sort of a parting shot by Lord Mandelson before he left. And one of the things here is this idea of introducing the notification of copyright. And so what we need to be aware of is what is the impact on copyright of information. If you're putting stuff into the internet or elsewhere out there, it could be company data or it could be private data or whatever. And what this Act is saying is you need to start, and some of the providers of these services need to prove evidence that they're actually identifying subscribers who are infringing those copyright laws. Now currently this is still, although it came out in force in the 8th of June 2010, it's a working approved code, but they're still having questions about how they can implement this. Is it possible to enforce this type of standard? Net neutrality, my friend in New York has been monitoring this very closely. And the famous example there is Google and Verizon. They're saying they're kind of getting a bit too close and they can start to control some of the traffic that's being allowed to come through the internet to certain services. They say, oh, no, this is not net neutrality, it's not the principle of the internet. It's not Tim Berners-Lee's vision, so to speak. And what this means is that they're saying, well, you can't enforce all of this. So they're kind of calling shy of this, but this is an issue about anonymity, privacy, and choices of freedom of choice within the internet. Legal data protection. What does this mean in terms of safe harbour? Safe harbour is where you need to know where data is held in sovereign territory, or can it be moved elsewhere to an off-premise, or can it indeed out of the country? There are legal constraints, European law and federal law, that controls those movements. And with the cloud, for example, with the internet and collaboration, some of this data, you don't know where it is. It could be anywhere. It could be moved around because you basically say, well, that supplier can sort that out for me. I don't need to track where it goes. But you may need to for legal reasons. FIMISTA, or rather the Federal Information Security Act of 2002, Sarbanes-Oxley, required evidence of movement of data. So if you're putting stuff into a virtual environment, the supplier may decide to virtually move that data. It will be transparent to you. They may move it to another data center in another country. The legal requirements of FISMA is that you need to prove where the data is held. And another one, which I quite like, is the global financial standards, if this is your cup of tea. what's happening there is they're trying to merge the IFRS and GAAP standards at the moment. What's the big deal around that? Well, what's happening in America, this is causing a great deal of consternation in the House of Representatives and the Senate. And what's these combination of different acts coming together is it's causing the opportunity potentially of foreign companies to come into the American markets because of the merging of those kind of laws. What does this mean in terms of transformation and collaboration technology? It means that through legal means, you're allowed to go and try and sell in new markets through this kind of change in legislation. A couple of case studies then I want to just hit you with. This came out a couple of years ago, and I quite like this one in terms of data loss. And it was a US carrier, T-Mobile, had let me just get my notes here. And what happened here was that there was about 1 million Sidekick subscribers. Sidekick is a cell phone, a mobile phone service. There's about 1 million of them, and basically what happened was that a subsidiary ran by Microsoft, nothing against Microsoft, honest. They were running these services to back up and maintain the subscriber data, and the system went down. Quite a few customers lost all of their personal data that was held in the cloud. So one of the things about this collaboration universe, and the things I'm going to take you through in the next few slides, is that there are consequences of moving information into a third-party environment. Not only the collaboration and exposure to your privacy, but also the control and access and backing up of that data. You're kind of, well, it's not a service level, it's your problem. You've got to back it up yourself, nothing to do with me. Another one is network access. This is a few years ago. It's quite a good one. It was probably not typical of the cloud and the sort of problems that happen. There's a cable, I believe, running through the Mediterranean. It's according to this, is 17,500 miles long. It's an internet cable. And basically what happened was that a trawler ship, went through and sliced it. And the whole system went down for about a week. It took about a week. The first problem was they had to try and find where the cable was, had broken. So they had remote submersibles and they're going around to find it. But the statistic is that 70% of the Egyptian online internet was affected. 70% of the Egyptian online internet. 60% of Indian internet was disrupted. 60%. A few years prior to that, December 2006, 8 cables in Taiwan were damaged by an earthquake. And basically most of Taiwan was taken out by this natural disaster. And that took it says here, took several months to get back to full operation. Now what I'm saying is that this isn't typical of the sort of damage that can occur in the internet. But the point is that you're starting to put network access right at the heart of your strategy. The performance of the network is very, very important. Service availability. This is again the poster child, Gmail. 113 million worldwide accounts according to this article here. And Google went down for a few hours. It was actually, 10 to 15 minutes. And a small subset of users, I don't know what they mean as small, it might be in a million, it's small to them. That's not small to me, it seems quite large. But again, I just want to stress upon this idea of service availability. This becomes a differentiator in this kind of marketplace, that you need to start thinking about what is the service level performance that you need to be maintaining in your competitive advantage. Another one, this came out recently with Intel has purchased McAfee. McAfee, you've got Norton McAfee on your PC, there's McAfee. And they paid $7.68 billion for McAfee. That's a lot of money. Now, why did Intel do that? And I would say that actually it was nothing to do with the fact they wanted to have hardware resident security, because they see the Intel computer chips will go into all these mobile devices, and you'll get much more online interaction with the internet through mobile devices. Not this one, but that's conceptually. What they realise is their reputation is at stake. And so this really just for me reinforces what I'm trying to say, is that the interaction of the internet, the devices that you're using, the importance of security and reputation becomes much more interdependent. You can be the world's biggest chip manufacturer, Intel, but if you can't back up and secure your devices and you're legally culpable for that, that makes a big deal. And so what we're finding here is reputation and branding becomes a much more intense, much more heightened, because you're kind of much faster. You can be discovered and found out and exposed much more quickly. Last one in this area is EMC. EMC may not be familiar with it. It's basically a very well-known storage company, data storage company. What they're doing is they're starting to focus on the FISMA standard. Remember I said things about moving data around in virtual environments? This company here is starting to do something about it because they realize that if you store stuff in a virtual environment, there's no way of proving where that is moving around. And they want to use this as a differentiator for the market. Couple more, just to finish off here. Murdoch, this is only a few months ago, wants to buy, he's always trying to do this, but he wants to buy the whole of BSkyB. I think he's got 49% shares at the moment, I believe. And the question is, why is this a big deal? Why not let MediaCorp buy BSkyB? And the answer for that really is twofold. If you read this article, I think it's a very good example of what I'm trying to say is that apart from the competitor raising this with Ofcom and saying no, we don't want Rupert Murdoch taking over the whole of BSkyB, we'll have problems of competing in the UK market. But actually what the big deal really is the idea that he also owns Fox News, Fox Films. He owns the Times newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, etc., etc., etc. I think he owns James Cameron's Avatar film, which is through the Fox Films. The big issue really here that I put this up to you is that what's happening is it gives Murdoch a chance to bundle, say, if you subscribe to a BSkyB broadband, you can bundle online subscription services for, say, the Times newspaper. What's the big deal about that? Well, it's a big deal because you can start to what they call cross-promote. You can start to use different types of media and channels to start to sell bundles of services, and you basically start to compete on that bundling strategy, which is a new way of going to market. And the big thing here is that what they're finding is that because they're such a big dog, it's got so much marketing budget. BSkyB has got a very large marketing budget. I used to work for BSkyB, so I actually know that for real. And they're saying that if he gets hold of the BSkyB completely, what it will allow him to do, just a small percentage of the BSkyB marketing budget, is dwarfs most other competitors in the UK market. The reason I'm raising this is really my first slide. Remember the scale, we're in the world of big scale. And what we're finding is you're getting a very, I think it's called asymptotic, a very skewed distribution of not the ABC analysis that the old manufacturing world we used to know and love from back in the, in the 1990s. What we're seeing here is, I'm looking at you, sorry. What we're finding is that we're starting to see very, very heavily skewed 4 or 5 big players who have masses of money, masses of resources, massive investment, and then trying to get hold of a complete market in a region. And it basically kills off all other competition. Remember my first question to you at the beginning of this lecture is, how can you differentiate? How can you compete against this? And this, for me, I really like this because it literally came out October the 12th. It's very, very hot off the press, this kind of issue. Is that that's the sort of world we're operating in. Not every market's like this, but that is the effect of the large dog in a big market. And finally, this is another one which I'd like to show you, which is to make the point about it's not the device, it's the content that's on the device that's the big issue. Now they're saying that basically this new operating system for Windows Phone 7 is kind of Microsoft's last chance saloon to compete against the iPhone. You read the article. But basically it really reinforces the point that they're saying that this won't succeed just for the fact they got some nice tiles, and I think they got Stephen Fry is saying, oh, this is a very nice product, that I'm not I don't just like Apple, I actually like this product too. They're saying that what will make this win or sink is basically the applications that are on it. They can build the community behind it to actually develop the sort of services that the customer wants. So what they need to do is they need to get insight about who is the customer that's going to use this. Is it my teenage daughters and son? Is it going to be me? Is it different types of market? What sort of segmentation is this going to go? You need to start to think about who is actually this market for, who is going to buy this. And then the competition. Well, they've already got, iPhone is already up and running. iTunes is a very good product. I like it personally. How is this going to survive? Now, again, this is a very sort of specific example within the telecoms market. But I think it's very typical of the sort of idea that you're trying to bundle services, trying to get content that is relevant to the consumer and the channel that you're trying to sell through. So where are we going with this? Where am I heading off? Where am I trying to take you? Where am I leading the witness to in terms of the thinking around the new strategy, my problem that I said earlier? Well, I think there are actually three things going on in terms of business strategy. I think we need to understand the network that we're actually working in. I mean that multiple networks. What type of market segments are you working in? What type of channels are you trying to sell to? The second thing is you need to start to understand the behavior. Now, I haven't used that word before, but all of the things about insight and preferences is really your behavior or your company's behavior or group behavior and the knowledge that may drive some of that behavior and the incentives and measures. Incentives and measures, you get what you measure. This is all online, real time. You need to start to understand, how do I visualize behavior? Remember, this is about transforming and collaboration. And finally, we need to visualize the marketplace. How can we collect that information? So whether you work for a very small company and maybe even a one-man operation in this room here, or you're working for a very large company, these factors, I would argue, are still the same for you. Now, this is not new. This is two areas. If this is your thing and you're interested in this, I urge you to read more about this. The value network analysis is an interesting area. Particularly, though, I want to point you to the systems thinking that's being developed through the DoD and NATO. And this is sort of circa 2003 and 4. What's really interesting is these two diagrams here. I'll just point you to those. Those were drawn in 2003. Now, when I saw this, I call it a Da Vinci moment, that it shouldn't exist. This is 500 years before its time, blah, blah, blah. And I found that quite odd because the thinking of networks was kind of there in that early sort of 2000s, but they didn't really describe it as an interaction that I'm kind of showing you with the slides earlier on. And I found this quite strange, and it's quite, that's odd. Where did they go with this? I don't think this went anywhere. I think it just kind of died in slow death. And then, as I said, another thing I want to show you is this thing called social points. I have a colleague, as I said, in Burbank, but he spends a lot of time in Los Angeles. I think he's up in Vancouver at the moment on a project. And one of the things he's saying is, have you seen this? Farmville. And there's a great, I think it's YouTube, if you run the video, there's a great lecture by it's called Beyond Facebook, and it's a professor at Carnegie Mellon who used to be an Imagineer at Disney. And he basically goes through a lot of scenarios, but one of the things, a great quote on the video, he says, there are more Farmville accounts than Twitter accounts. I didn't see that one coming. And this is one of the emergent behaviors of information and content that you start to see in the marketplace you're dealing with. Then some examples, like 10 points for you, good job for brushing your teeth. And what we're finding here, this is a silly example, but I quite like it, is that we're starting to see incentives built into the type of interaction that we're dealing with. We sort of do this subliminally when I go into Tesco's or Sainsbury's and you get your loyalty card out. And they're saying, I think Tesco's is just saying they're going to go from 4 times to 3 times if you read the Yahoo in the last 12 hours or something. And what we're seeing here is he reckons the culture is going to be much more point-driven, incentive-driven. So how do you incent people to do your service? Because remember, I've got lots of choices. I could go to Tesco's, I could go to Sainsbury's, I could use different services. When you go into the App Store, you have different scores, and you have sort of feedback from users. eBay is like that. And I would argue this is just the thin end of the wedge. It's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how this could be incentivized and measuring dynamic performance and driving your customers towards different types of products and services. Points received for governance for mass transportation. He reckons there may be ways in which you will start to incentivize people to go green and use different types of transport. I just can't wait for the Nissan Leaf to come out. I don't know about you, it might not be everybody's taste of a car, but this idea of moving to fully electric cars, It's just an inevitability in my book. And I think these are sort of things that you'll start to see. But the colleague of Vladimir that I work with in Burbank, he's saying he reckons they will start to emerge as things where you need to rate the privacy of a service. So when you look at this service online, you say, well, how much information do they want about me and what they're going to do with the information? And he reckons they're going to start to introduce privacy level metering. You can monitor how much information you're giving away when you do a transaction. Rather weird way of thinking about it, but it's kind of, that's the way the world may go, because everything is becoming digital. Another thing that I'm working on, which I wanted to share with you, is the thing called quantum lifecycle management. I don't know if anybody's heard about it. This is literally new. This came out in the last, literally came out in the last month. It's something that's kicked off, and I'm on this project. Incidentally, if you follow the URL, you can actually join this project. It's starting this week, where they're growing on. There's a Promise project, and basically the Promise project, if you look at the supply chain, a physical supply chain, the flow of goods, products around a supply chain, the goal of this project is to actually digitize through remote sensors, through RDRF tags and things like that, start to digitize the supply chain. Now, why is this significant? The reason I'm raising this is that before I was talking about is the customer relationship, profiling your users and understanding about you. The other end of the supply chain, the things that you use, the car you drive, the materials you use, and the things you consume, that will start to become much more digitized as well. So the two, the front end and the back end, will start to come together. And really the goal of this vision here, this is real, this is not fantasy. So they're trying to get digital information about everything in the supply chain from cradle to grave. So they're talking about quantum lifecycle management. It's meant to be a quantum leap from product lifecycle management of the old world. Not just about the design lifecycle or the selling lifecycle or the supplier lifecycle. It's the whole lifecycle from cradle to grave. And the whole thing will be digital. So what this means basically is we're starting to see this kind of vision about how business is changing, how the supply chain is changing. So instead of, as I said, sort of layers and stacks of resources and information flowing up and down, left and right, you're starting to see this kind of, I call it a mass of interactions of different types of players, different types of preferences, different types of processes, online and offline. We're starting to see the digitization of your preferences, the digitization of the supply chain flow itself. We're starting to see different types of markets emerging. Those case studies I showed about NASDAQ or New York Times or Animoto, some of your business operations can be ran in the cloud at a lower cost. So this is a big sort of, hopefully an aha moment. This slide here, basically what we're seeing in Capgemini in terms of our view is there's possibly two types of integration going on. The first type of integration is the ability to get connected between back end and front end. A lot of the case studies I was showing you is about the front end becoming much more digital, social CRM, e-marketing, profiling all the people and the preferences in the marketplace. And what you're trying to do is then connect that back to your supply chain so you can actually feed that capability as and when they need it, so you can do services on demand. So we think the first thing that we need to start thinking about is how do you integrate front and back end. Second thing is what we call second generation integration. Is then once you've done that, differentiation is at the edge. Edge is basically the devices that you use these services with. What we're seeing is this idea that you start to compete really on the edge. So that on the view that is everybody can commoditize and standardize the sort of supply chain behind it. It's just really how you then execute the final, what we call last mile logistics, the last 10 yards or 10 miles or 10 centimeters from the brain to the keyboard. How you actually express and drive that edge differentiation. I love this example. This is one that's hopefully my best example I can give you to date. I went to a client in New York, it's in New Jersey, in fact, New Brunswick. This client is a pharmaceutical company. It's a well-known, world-class brand that you will know about, but I can't mention. And one of the things that I went in, and I was going in, I'm wheeled in as a sort of a guru, so to speak, and it's going to talk to them about cloud computing. And they said, well, and I asked them, well, you want discovery services, you want backup and recovery, you want integration of your shared services so you can get lots of business units using the shared service. And so no, the reason we're doing this is actually because two reasons. Example here is they're finding that small companies, small to medium-sized enterprises can basically eat their lunch. The third-party cloud, which could be providing resources for, say, doing research or collaboration technology or regulatory compliance, because the cloud service provider behind in their supply chain has the regulation for HIPAA standards. A small to medium-sized competitor can actually compete with this large multinational global customer. And they spent all their years and investments in CapEx building their value chain, their supply chain. They've invested in all of these infrastructure around the world. And suddenly they're finding that these small companies can come in and actually sell new pharmaceutical products in their market space, in their backyard. And that's a sort of an aha moment for me, because he said, well, whatever you're talking about, we've got to do this anyway. But that wasn't the only thing. The other thing was, if you notice these self-service lines, what's happening is that the IT department is sitting up there in its proverbial ivory tower, so to speak, and that's not true in all cases, clearly. And what's happening is that the business units, and the business people even, are going out and using self-service. They're getting out the credit card and going in and buying these IT services or business services and bypassing the IT department's strategy altogether. What I find amusing, but actually quite frightening in that respect, is that A, it's very empowering. But what it's fundamentally doing is it's lowering the barrier of entry to consuming services. It's changing competitive advantage. So when we hear about the usual sort of joke about you get your credit card and you can go and buy your own system and off you go, what that actually means in MBA business speak is that you've lowered the access barrier. You've increased the agility of the process. You've changed the competitive advantage landscape. And that's really the big deal about all of this. That's what's fundamentally changed. And we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar company saying, ooh, I've got to do something about this because this is a slow car crash waiting to happen and I can just see it happening right in front of me. And there they are looking at virtualization programs and building this big cathedral down here. In the meantime, they're starting to get erosion of their products. They need to be thinking about patents. They need to be thinking about renewing new innovation of products. And in the backcloth is that they're finding competitors can just come in and do that quicker than they can. They're more agile. So this one is really, getting back to the MBA speak, so to speak, is how is all of this changing competitive advantage? This is an article that's coming out in rewritecloud.com. I've got my editor who's based in San Francisco. I've written a paper recently about this, and I'll send the URL when it comes out. I think what's happening is a number of different drivers are really changing the competitive landscape in a number of industries. I think it's basically changing, lowering the barrier of access. Remember the credit card moment and choosing the online self-service? I think it's lowering the need for CapEx investment. You can just use OpEx to buy these services. I think it's speeding up provisioning time, making it faster. I think it's creating new aggregation opportunities to bring different services together and offer that out as an aggregated service. I think it's increasing the speed of change, because you don't need to change your brownfield. You can just go in and buy some service over there and just get on with it, which is what they're doing, that big company. They're realizing, oh, well, forget the enterprise strategy. We'll just forget that. We've just got to get on with it. Oh, no, crikey, the whole thing's going south anyway, so we've just got to do it. And then here, margins, economies of scale, because you're buying into this massive scalable resource architecture from some of these big players like Amazon. You can leverage that economies of scale without having to invest yourself. So what does this mean in terms of barriers? And I was trying to understand, trying to create this idea about how do you build barriers to these kind of competitors who are coming in and emulating, copying your service. Or horizontal investment, scaling, this idea of a Google or an Amazon basically have masses of resources. The B-Sky-B case study I showed you. How do you compete? How do you put barriers up against that? How do you do that? Brand awareness. Remember the Microsoft case study I showed you. How do you exploit your brand? It's all about white labeling, online bundling, Yeah? Vertical integration, augmented intelligence, augmented capabilities. You don't have to own the brains inside your own four walls. You can use somebody else's brains on demand. You can be faster, you can be more secure. And I would say in terms of strategy, there's a lot of levers. I mean, this is in terms of your case studies. Certainly, when I was doing my MBA, God knows when, a lot of the case studies were asking questions like this about how do you put in barriers, how do you sort of defend against or attack different marketplaces. And I would say in this world, though, these barriers and these dynamics are changing. So in terms of the way, for example, you get insight about your customer, so we've got, say, lots of different segments around the room here, different preferences and choices. I need to understand that because all of you are using a digital channel. So I need to build that kind of insight. I need to decide what sort of barriers can I put up? What am I going to differentiate on? Is it about being able to mimic and copy and do low-cost introduction of services? Is it about horizontal investment so I can offer a shared service to all of you in one go? It's what I call multiplicity. I can all do the same service to all of you simultaneously. Is it about integration, about knowledge and insight? And really the big change that we're seeing, just coming out the last few slides, is because many companies have similar products and services. I mean, there's an example of Volvo, or there's another one which is Volkswagen and Audi. In the automotive market in particular, all of them are selling cars, obviously. So what's different? What's different is you're getting variations at the end of delivery. And it's the way you radically change your behavior in selling the final part of the service is where you're going to get differentiation. Now that's either, oh yes, I agree with that, or yeah, okay, that sounds plausible. The reason I'm saying this is that this is becoming much more heightened in the business today, particularly in markets like the ones I've listed up there, the pharmaceutical market, the financial services market, the banking market. I believe we were going to have a banking speaker today, which would have been very interesting to hear that insight. And the automotive market, the telecoms market. It's at the edge, it's at the variation, the consumer experience when you're buying the online services or you're delivering the online order experience of the car or the products. That's where you're going to differentiate and decide. Because everything else is commodity. Not everything, but most of it will be commodity. Two examples, two case studies. Everything Everywhere, May 2010. Merger of Orange and T-Mobile. Basically, it's Deutsche Telekom owns T-Mobile, and Orange is French, I believe. I was very lucky to attend a Deutsche Telekom lecture in Rome back in May, and they basically presented their IT strategy around this sort of stuff. And one of the things that was very interesting about Deutsche Telekom was they saw themselves establishing a service intermediate platform. What I mean by that is that, remember the case study I showed you about Microsoft's phone 7? So they realise in their unique position in the market of the integration of the network is that they need to be offering convergent services as a platform service. And the question here, and I don't know the answer to this, apart from the PMI, post-merger integration challenges that you see the sort of restructuring of headcount and stuff that was announced, I think, in the last 3 or 4 days between these two companies. One of the challenges for this company, particularly these two companies coming together, is how are they going to differentiate in the marketplace based on all the stuff I just mentioned. As a service provider, Capgemini, how can we help them make that change? How can we drive that sort of innovation and value? O2 is another case study. All of this is open in the public. It's not confidential. O2 talk about growth and performance, network investments, improving customer experience, conversions, bundles, discounts. Sounds familiar? Speed up this transition. We need to do it faster because people have got choices. They can go elsewhere. They've got low switching cost barriers. Building brand momentum was a word. You can go and read this. It's all in the URLs attached to this slide. How do I build the brand? How do I build more value to the customers? In-country market needs and dynamics. Competing at the edge in the country itself. So you compete locally, but you build global infrastructures to get economies of scale. A couple of more slides then, just to finish off with the conclusions. This slide is actually a redefinition of Clayton Christian's Disruptive Innovation book. You must have heard of that one. Or there's another book by Mark Watson, I think it's Mark Watson, Seizing the White Space. Everything I'm talking about is the speed of dynamicism is changing in industry. It's not about IT, not just IT, it's about business thinking about IT as well. Typically, operational statistics and performance is planned at this level. But then you have kind of flexibility built into the contract here. But what I'm talking about is actually over here. And this is really where competition is going to be growing. How do you build new markets? How do you expand and build differentiation and capability? Because you're being able to be much more precise about how you're going to grow market share. Scalability is again another thing. How do you get economies of scale? How do you build more market share, market volume? What I would say is that actually the business model has changed, and this is my vision for 2020 in 10 years' time. And I think there's actually three areas, three new business models that are going to need to be developed as a competitive strategy. Sort of answering my own question, so to speak. And this is what I think. I don't know, I'd like to hear what you think. My first position is I think there needs to be some kind of strategy for developing insight about your personas, both your personal personas and also your market and your business personas, the people and the marketplace you're working in. So the first thing that we need to start thinking about is beyond the brand, as I call it. Scale, size and bundles is something that I think is going to be a strategy that will be inherited. I think you have some lectures like I think they do customer relationship management and customer user experience as a usual topic in lectures. That's what that is, but it needs to be linked up to the back end. So we think, and some of the work that we've been doing, particularly in my own company at the moment, is a lot of customers are starting to realise they need to not only just do order management, they actually need to do far more than that. They need to understand and change the behaviours of customers and manage that proactively to bring them to your door. And then what I would say, remember I mentioned about the quantum lifecycle management and the next generation product lifecycle management, the digitization of everything. I think there's basically a physical world and a virtual world. It's different from 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. I think that workloads can actually exist in both. Workload being any task or activity that your business does, or you. It doesn't have to be all physical, it could be all virtual. And you need to start thinking about virtual operations, virtual workloads, virtual assets and relationships. How do you digitize those through first and second level integration? First level integration is front and back end, gluing those together. Second level integration is how those markets are going to be opened up through different devices and Windows and self-service shop, app stores and things like that. And then over here is that you need to be able to collect the information that you need about the operation. How are you going to collect that sensory data? How are you going to profile it? And multiplicity is an unusual word. It does exist if you go and look at the research that Intel mobile phones have been doing in their own research labs. So multiplicity is, instead of me providing a service to one or two people here, I can replicate that service for all of you simultaneously and vary it by each individual need. That is multiplicity. So I think there are basically 5 things in conclusion that's really changing about where the market is going and what's happening about transformation through collaboration, the impact of technology on business strategy. So my postulate to you all is actually 5 things are happening around business strategy in collaboration. The first one is we need to develop differentiation through behaviour insights. It's the behaviour that will make the differentiation. Remember the points about Farmville, about understanding your choices and preferences. That will be a major change that I think we will need to get much more into. And some industries that are very IT intensive, like banking, like financial services, like media companies, will start to focus on that much more heavily in terms of profiling you as an individual. Second thing is we need to develop digital knowledge about the marketplace and the company. Digital knowledge about how it's performing, how you're collecting different sensory data. Third thing is we need to basically represent the physical world in a digital format. So it's not just planning and scheduling in old speak of supply chain activity. It's physically representing the physics of the real world in a digital form. Fourth thing, size and bundling is a potential weapon when linked to meeting and linking behavior types, e.g. Farmville. Size does matter, and bundling does matter. And being able to leverage those in a way that meets the customer needs will be the way the future will grow, in my view. Because you can't out-Google a Google. You can't out-Amazon an Amazon. But you can collaborate, you can have alliance strategies, and you can combine those two together with your own secret source of insights about your customer base, and you can leverage both and deliver a new kind of value proposition. And finally, my view is I think the physical world, I hope I've shown this, if I haven't and I've failed, I hope I haven't, is that the physical world and the virtual world are actually the same thing. They're coming together. As of 10 years ago, this didn't exist, it was emerging, but actually I think it's now with us. And I was asked in Boston, I was on a panel, and somebody said, well, do you think this has started yet? And I said, well, the fact that we're actually recording this and it's going out on iTunes afterwards, and there's probably 4 or 5 people over in Boston who were tweeting in the audience. And I said, well, yeah, it's happening right now. And this is what I find quite exciting, but quite scary. All of this leakage of information, all of this value. And we asked the guys in Facebook a few years ago, you know, are you planning on exploiting the social graph of all of those 350 million customers that you've got at the moment? And they didn't really care because it wasn't part of their mission. You know, they were just there to have a good time, so to speak. And they had all these sort of, I think it was, you know, they were sort of mid to late 20s. And they said, well, do you realise from a business ethic point, you know, the amount of opportunity you got there could be phenomenal. And I worked in B-Sky-B and we had 15 different databases of customer information. We need to consolidate those. And they said that if you could just get 10,000 new profiles on that database, that's worth over $2–3 million on the bottom line. The power of information about insight, about being precision and direct about your data is extremely powerful. So I hope I've been interesting. I've tried to take you through some of the pain points that I've got. That's really all I've got. I hope I haven't ran too long, but back to you, Catherine.